Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Understanding the PPR, What It Is, and How to Complete It. This session provides an overview of reporting requirements and due dates, describes each of the performance progress report forms, referred to as the PPR forms, and explains the data and indicators that you as the grantee are required to report on. Understanding the PPR, What It Is, and How to Complete It. It also provides guidance and tips on information that must be included in your PPR submission. The webinar is being recorded, and information about where you can access the recording will be sent to you after today's presentation once it becomes available. Before we begin the presentation, I'd like to introduce CED Program Manager Rafael J. Elizalde to do a quick introduction. So Rafael, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Whitney. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us on today's webinar. We hope you and yours are doing well, and I'm happy to see so many of you have joined today's call, especially brand new CED grantees who just received their first CED grant and new staff. Welcome to our program. We at the Office of Community Services are here to help you in any way we can to ensure your projects are successful. This includes helping to make sure you have enough information and assistance available for completing your required reporting requirements. Today's presentation is the first of several resources available to CED grantees throughout October to assist you with the PPR process. This particular session was recommended for new grantees and staff new to the PPR process, so I hope this will be a good introduction to what the PPR is and the data grantees are responsible for collecting and reporting on. I encourage you to take advantage of all of the PPR resources and technical assistance available to you right now, but know that you can email us with any question, clarification, or requests needed. Continue to take care of yourself, your families, and communities. Now I will turn it back to Whitney for the remainder of the presentation. Thank you. Whitney?
Thanks, Rafael. So before we get going, just some housekeeping items. We are using Teams Live as the platform today. This is the first time we've used Teams Live for a CED webinar before. For those of you that aren't familiar, as attendees, you are listen-in only, and you cannot unmute your line to ask a question verbally. So if you do have a question, send those questions through the Q&A feature in Teams Live. It's located on the right side of your screen, as you see on this slide. So feel free to send questions as you have them. You don't need to wait until the end of the presentation. And we will either send you a written response or we will address your question verbally. Keep in mind that we're also offering some PPR office hour sessions throughout October. And these sessions are smaller group sessions where you can bring those specific questions. So if after today's call you have something that you wish you would have asked, just sign up for the office hours and we can address those questions there. We'll remind you at the end of the call how you can sign up for office hours. And if you have any problems with Teams Live or using Q&A or have any technical issues at all, you can send us an email at the OCS registrar at icf.com and we can help you. So today's agenda, we will go over what the PPR is and an overview of the reporting process and the timeline for when things are due. And we'll spend the majority of today's call going through the reporting forms and looking at the data elements within the forms that you need to report on. And we will end today's call just going over some resources and support that are available to you. So first, what is the performance progress report, which we refer to as the PPR, and I'll refer to as that throughout today's presentation. The PPR is a semi-annual report that you are required to submit through the online data collection system, or OLDC. the PPR provides information about the project for your CED grant. So you submit through the online data collection system, which we're not going to go into today about how to actually use OLDC, but that will be available to you in different webinars and resources. The PPR is designed to provide a snapshot of how the project is doing and collects information on key indicators, including number of jobs, number of businesses, and funds leveraged. It also provides funders, Congress, and stakeholders with data on the CED program to really show its value and how your projects contribute to your communities. This system also allows you to see previous reports, compare data, and archive for your program records. This is an example of an infographic for the CED program that's featured on our website. And this is just show you what we really do with the data that you submit in your PPR. I think it's helpful to see the data this way to show how OCS really uses it and how what you put in your PPR really goes on to impact the CED program. Here's another that's all about the accomplishments of CED projects that were completed between 2014 and 2018. Again, this data comes from what grantees self-report in the PPR. So this is just to give you some context on how the PPR data is used and really the importance of submitting a high quality PPR. As we go through today's presentations, we're going to be talking about all of the indicators that are a part of the PPR, and they can be very complex, but I really want to stress the importance of understanding these indicators and how a good understanding helps you submit a high quality, detailed PPR. So this is really your opportunity to report to OCS on the progress of your projects. This includes the accomplishments of the project as well as the challenges the project has encountered, with details as to why business and job creation may be slower than anticipated and how you plan to overcome these challenges. Submitting PPRs with specific details that paint a realistic picture of how the project is doing has a lot of benefits, both for you as the grantee and for OCS. First, it provides your program specialist with enough information to be able to recognize the accomplishments of your project, which is great for them to see if your project is doing really well and is on track, meeting goals. But more importantly, it helps identify areas where your projects may be experiencing some difficulties and challenges. And when you submit a high quality PPR with a high level of detail, it's easier for your program specialist to identify where they can help you. It's important to remember that you're not going to be penalized for reporting on challenges in your PPR or on data that maybe you're behind in some of your job creation goals or other indicators. It's really about being proactive about providing this information to OCS so your program specialist can help you address them. In order for your program specialist to help you get on track, they just need to know about what's going on. Submitting a high detail PPR also minimizes the likelihood that your program specialist will reject your report and ask you to provide additional information. So your program specialist has the ability to return a submitted PPR to you if they have specific details that they want more information on, and including that information up front can help eliminate them sending it back to you to resubmit. And for those of you who have had a PPR return in the past, you know that it does slow down the approval process, which can have an effect on you meeting these PPR deadlines. So the more detail you provide initially, the faster the approval process will be and help ensure that you're in compliance with the PPR due dates. So throughout today's call, I will be pointing out some tips for how to ensure that you're providing the level of detail required in the PPR. So just pay attention to those as we go through the indicators. So now I'll quickly go over the general process of the PPR and the timeline of when and how you will submit it. So this is very high level overview of the process, but basically throughout the course of your grant, you'll track data on jobs and businesses created through your CED project and submit this data in the PPR. This submission is done through the online data collection system, or OLDC as it is referred to. And again, I will be discussing OLDC and the actual technical process of submitting in another presentation. And then once you submit your PPR in the system, your program specialist reviews the PPR and either rejects or approves it. A rejected PPR is returned to you to correct, revise, add data, whatever your program specialist requires, and then you will resubmit. And then once your PPR is approved, you have fulfilled the reporting requirement for the reporting period. The table on this slide shows the timeline for when you will submit for the reports each year. It's semi-annual, so you'll submit twice a year, once in April and once in October. So the timeline for when the reporting period opens and when things are due are on this slide. And if you are a new grantee that just received a new grant, you'll submit your first report in April. So before that time, you'll receive more information about using OLDC. So if you're a brand new grantee that has never seen OLDC before, don't worry, we're going to walk you through that process first time you report in April. So keep in mind, OCS wants you to be successful in completing your required PPR on time just as much as they want your projects to be successful. So in addition to today's presentation and the resources that are available to you to complete the PPR, your OCS program specialist is always available to assist you as well. So now I'll get into the actual forms of the PPR. So it consists of 4 forms. The first is the cover page that just includes some basic information about your project and organization that is pre-populated. So you don't have to do much here. I would just review it every time you're going to submit a PPR and let your program specialist know if any information is incorrect or if any information has changed. Form A collects the quantitative data, and that is the form that I will spend the most time going through today. Form B gives you a chance to explain your project in a narrative format, so you can kind of tell the story about your project, what's really going on. And Form E asks you to report on some financial data. And we will now walk through each of these forms. The first is Form A, and like I mentioned, this is what we'll spend most time today talking about. It's the most complicated and detailed of the forms. It collects the quantitative data about your project. And what I'll do today is kind of go through each of the indicators in Form A, give you an understanding of what the indicators mean and what they're asking for. This is where you'll report on the numbers that your jobs, businesses, funds, leverage that your project, the accomplishments. So this is a screenshot of Form A. It's basically set up as a grid with multiple columns, some things that you'll need to enter data on and some things that you won't. The first 3 columns basically just are what asks you for what you need to report on. So you can review those and that's what you'll be entering your data for. Then you have some pre-populated columns, and then the last 2 columns is where you will actually be entering in your data. The actual to date column is where you'll enter the number for what answers the question about the indicator. So for example, how many positions that you created, how many businesses you've created, and this number will always be cumulative. So you're always entering in the data for your project cumulatively. And there's also an explanation field, which allows you to elaborate a bit more on the numbers that you entered in the actual to date column. The indicators of the PPR are organized by the objectives listed on this slide. So I'm not going to be going through all of the objectives and goals today, but they're here for your reference. The one thing that I will point out is that not all objectives may apply to your project. So for example, some grantees will be expanding a business and not creating one, so those business creation objectives won't apply to your specific project. For every one of those objectives listed on that slide, there are a set of indicators. Indicators are data points that you want to collect data and report on. All the indicators are numbered and have a letter code for the type of data that you'll be collecting. It just makes it easier for you to identify them. So B is for business indicators and J is for jobs, just for some examples. It's just to help you identify them. And these indicator numbers will become more familiar to you the more that you report. So the first column that we'll talk about is the baseline column, and this is pre-populated. It's populated based on your previous report. So if you have never reported before, all of these numbers will be 0, and it's just because you've never provided data before. But if you have reported before, the baseline column will populate based on your previous report. It's not, you can't edit it. It's just there to provide the ability to compare data from your last report 6 months ago and the progress that has been made. The project target column is also a column that you can't edit. It's going to be populated for indicators where you proposed some project outcomes in your original application. So these are some examples of the indicators that will have a pre-populated project target. Not all will be populated, but the ones listed on your slide will be. You don't need to do anything, just check them. If something doesn't look right, you can include that in the explanation column and you can send us an email and let us know and we can make those edits for you. But it's not something you can edit on your own. It's just to see what you propose in your original application versus what you're reporting on. It helps you and OCS see kind of how the project is progressing. The next column is the actual to date column, and this is the column where you enter in your data. It collects data on everything that you have accomplished so far in the grant, and it's, like I said before, it's cumulative. This is often a source of confusion for grantees, but the actual to date column will always be cumulative. So you're not just reporting on those 6 month periods. So for example, if in the first reporting period you create 10 jobs, you'll enter 10 in the actual to date column. And then in the next reporting period, if you've created 10 additional jobs, you'll enter 20 in the actual to date column. So now I'm going to go over each of the indicators within each category. There are a lot of them, and I understand this is a lot of information, but this presentation is really meant for you to be able to refer back to as you report. And you can also, again, reach out to your program specialist with your specific questions or bring them to the PPR office hours. So I'm going to go through each indicator kind of moving down the form. I will be skipping some of the more complicated indicators as I go through them, and we'll go back to them at the end of the presentation. So I'll start at the top of the form with the business and job indicators. So you can see here on the slide the indicator number and what the question that it's asking. So A1 is asking about new businesses created, and A4 is asking about businesses expanded. So you report on businesses created and expanded separately. You'll enter 0 if the indicator does not apply to your project. So for example, if your project will only be creating new projects, you should enter 0 for the number of businesses expanded because you aren't doing that. But you do want to explain that in the explanation field because there's a difference between reporting 0 because your project isn't expanding businesses versus reporting 0 because the businesses that you propose to expand just haven't been expanded yet. So next is A5, and this is the only question on the PPR that asks you about part-time positions. So you can report here on any part-time positions that the grant has created, but everything else deals with full-time positions. A6 asks you how many full-time positions for low-income individuals have ever been created over the project period. So you'll always want to list positions here, even if they do not exist anymore. So once a job is created, even if that job is no longer filled by an employee, it will always count as a job that was once created. So this number will always increase or stay the same. It will never go down. And next is indicator AOOJ, which asks for the total number of jobs for both low income and non-low income people. In the form, it's listed above AO6 because the idea is that AOOJ is both non and low income jobs. And AO6 is only the jobs out of that total number that are filled by low income people. So AOOJ will always be equal to or greater than AO6. And remember, the premise of the CED program is to create jobs for individuals with low income, but OCS is also interested in how many full-time non-low income jobs were created. So that's how you'll show them that in AOOJ. But another thing to keep in mind is that AOOJ is the only indicator that asks for information on non-low income jobs. For the rest of the indicators in the PPR, they are specific to tracking low income individuals. So once you report on the basic information about businesses and jobs, you'll be asked about certain characteristics about those jobs. And again, they're only asking for information about low income jobs reported in AO6J, not any additional jobs reported in AOOJ for non-low income individuals. So some of those characteristics will be about benefits. So these are the 4 benefit questions that the PPR asks you to report on for low income jobs: health benefits, sick leave, retirement, and profit sharing. All of these, again, are a subset of the total full-time jobs created. So the number cannot be higher than the total number of positions that you've created in AO6J. The online system has some data checks built into it. So things like this that I mentioned throughout the webinar about not being able to enter a higher number, the system helps you out with that with some data checks. These are just some tips to keep in mind as you're collecting your data. When you're reporting on benefits, keep in mind that they're not mutually exclusive. So if a position has 2 benefits, for example, health benefits and sick leave, you'll count both of those created in AO9 and A10J. So you should report on all the benefits offered. And if they don't apply to the project, if the jobs don't offer health benefits, then you'll enter 0 for that indicator and just explain in the explanation column that it does not apply to those jobs. Next, you'll report on employees, so those individuals who are filling the jobs created by the businesses. And again, the PPR comes as a form, so I'm kind of moving down those forms. You start reporting on businesses, jobs, and then the employees filling those jobs. So these indicators will ask specific questions about the individuals and the jobs, some of which will apply to your project and others may not. So you'll just want to answer the ones that apply to yours, and if they don't, you can enter 0 and just explain that that's not what your project is doing. So A13E through A15E has the objective prepare low-income individuals for employment. And so this is related to any type of job training you're doing. Training is not the objective of the CED grant, but funds can be used for limited training for the specific jobs created with your grant. So this is where you'll report on them. And I know I've said this, but just as a reminder, the employee indicators are only about the low income employees who fill the positions created. So ultimately a subset of AO6J, low income jobs only. And they're only asking about people hired in full-time positions. As I mentioned, you report on part-time positions in only 1 indicator, and then you don't deal with them for the rest of Form A. So it's just full-time positions for low-income people. As you move down the questions in the form, you'll see that you're really drilling down by certain characteristics. So for example, A16E listed on this slide asks for the total low-income individuals ever hired into any position created with grant funds. Then the next question asks for the number of those that were reported in A16E who were TANF recipients. So it's a subset. It can never be higher than the number of individuals reported in A16. And this is the same for the next set of indicators as you kind of move down. A18 and A19 ask about starting wages for low-income individuals, and then the next set of questions ask for the starting wages for only TANF recipients. The next set of questions asks you to report on any individuals that received raises and promotions, and these are out of the total individuals hired, so it can never be a higher number than what was reported in A16E. So again, as you move down the form, you're drilling down into subsets of the A16 indicator. And the final set of indicators deal with funding. So A26 through A30 ask about leverage funding in addition to your OCS funds. So if you didn't leverage any additional funding, you can enter 0 here. Leveraging is not required of your CED grant, but if you have leveraged funds, you'll want to let OCS know here. And keep in mind, this is in addition to your OCS funds, so your grant award should not be included. This is not where you report that. So to report on these indicators about leveraging, A27 through 30 are subcategories of the total amount leveraged. So your total amount leveraged is represented in A26. This column is actually automatically generated based on the amounts that you enter in the subcategories. So everything you enter in A27 through 30 is added for you. It does the math for you. You just have to enter the numbers by category. And these categories are mutually exclusive. You'll want to count every source of leveraging only once, even if it could fit into multiple subcategories. You don't want to double count anything. So as an example of that, for loans, you'll always count them in the loan category, regardless of whether they are private or government. And again, do not include your CED grant in the government funds source section. This is only for funding in addition to, not including CED funds. And if you're having trouble fitting a leveraging source into one of the categories, A30 is kind of a catch-all category that you can add there, and you'll just want to provide an explanation in that column for what the source is. So those are the basic, more straightforward questions of the PPR. And there are a few questions that I skipped over because they are a bit more complicated, so I wanted to spend a little more time discussing. These indicators kind of drill down even more than the others that we just discussed, and they track longevity of businesses and positions and give credit for positions that you create that last. So the key time frame for businesses is 12 months and for position is 6 months. So in order to track this type of data, the PPR asks you 2 questions. Ask for the number of new businesses created at least 12 months ago, regardless of whether or not they still exist. And then of those, how many have been operational for at least 12 months? So asking these 2 questions is necessary to differentiate between businesses that have been operational for 12 months, new businesses that are not yet 12 months old, and businesses created more than 12 months ago, but for whatever reason did not last. So some things to keep in mind as you're collecting data and going through your PPR is that the number of businesses lasting at least 12 months ago can't be more than the number of businesses created at least 12 months ago, and same for jobs. And again, the OLDC system does have some checks in place to make sure that you can't report. You'll get an error message. You won't be able to submit a report that has that data error. And once a business lasts 12 months, it counts as successful in every reporting period moving forward, even if it closes or ends. So this is important to keep in mind as you're reporting. When you report on something in the PPR, it's a cumulative number. So even if a business closes or a job ends, it's still counted as having been created. So this slide kind of shows visually what that looks like, since I know just explaining it is a bit complicated. So AO1B is all the businesses that were ever created. So this is at the top of the inverted triangle. AO2B is a subset of those because it only counts the businesses that were created at least 12 months ago. It does not count the ones that were created within the last 12 months. And AO3B is a subset of AO2B because it looks at the businesses that were created at least 12 months ago, and then only the ones that lasted more than 12 months. Positions work the same way, but it's a 6-month period instead of 12, and we use the same kind of inverted triangle visual to help represent that. And again, for positions, it's referring to full-time, low income only. AO6J is all of the full-time positions ever created. It's going to be the largest number that you report on. It's the top part of the triangle. AO7J is a subset of those because it only counts the full-time positions that were created at least 6 months ago and does not count the ones that were created within the last 6 months. And then AO8J is a subset of AO7 because it looks at the full-time positions that were created at least 6 months ago and then only counts the ones that have lasted more than 6 months. So same kind of visual representation. I know this is a little bit of a tricky indicator and we get a lot of questions about it. So as you're reporting, refer back to this presentation and to differentiate between what you should be reporting on. So we went through businesses, positions, and then the next group of indicators deals with individuals. So it's always in that order: businesses, jobs, and then individual employees within that job. So this group deals with the individual's longevity in a position, and it demonstrates how you have helped individuals retain their jobs. A22 and A23 ask for the number of low-income individuals, including TANF recipients, who have retained their jobs for 6 months or more. And then A24 and 25 ask about TANF recipients only. So you keep drilling down deeper into the data as you move down the questions in the PPR. So same kind of inverted triangle to help you visualize this. A16E again is the all low-income individuals ever hired into the positions. And A17 is a subset of those that are TANF recipients. Of all low-income individuals, A22 asks for only those that were hired more than 6 months ago. So subtracting any that were hired within the last 6 months. And A24, a subset of those, asks about TANF recipients. Of the low-income individuals hired more than 6 months ago, A23 asks for only those that retain their jobs for more than 6 months. So subtracting any that did not retain their jobs for 6 months. And again, A25, as you move down the form, a subset of those specific to TANF recipients. So you'll see how the questions kind of become more specific as you move down the form and towards the bottom of this inverted triangle. So you'll kind of drill down, the numbers will get lower as you drill down into the data. So I know that that is a lot of information about the indicators, and I expect that you will have to kind of refer back to this presentation as you complete the PPR. And keep in mind, the more you report, the more these indicators will make sense. And we're always available to assist you as you're reporting. So I just wanted to go back to the concept that I mentioned in the beginning of the call about submitting a high quality PPR. And of course, including accurate data on all the indicators that I just discussed is a big part of that. But explaining your data is equally as important. The last column of Form A, the explanation field, is there to allow you to briefly explain any of your answers, so any of the data that you put into an indicator, to just give it some more context. These explanations should be kept brief because Form B, that we'll talk about next, is where you can provide some longer, more narrative explanations. But the explanation column in Form A helps give context to the indicators that you provide. So one of the data checks in OLDC is that the explanation column must be completed for any indicator that you enter 0 for. So just a short explanation of why your program currently has 0 for indicators. So this kind of has two parts. First, if you enter 0 for an indicator because it doesn't apply to your project, that's what you can state in the explanation field. But you also want to give context for why you entered 0 for an indicator that does apply to your project. So for example, if you haven't created any jobs yet, you might put in the explanation field, no jobs were created because construction hasn't been completed or has been delayed. See Form B for more information, and that's where you can kind of elaborate on that. And if an indicator does not apply to your program, you don't want to just write NA in the explanation field. You just want to kind of explain it a little bit more. Say our project is focused on business creation and not expanding, so we won't be expanding any projects, any businesses. This just helps your program specialist have a better understanding of what the numbers that you put into the actual to date column mean. This really helps your program specialist get a much better sense of how your project is doing. The information in the explanation column also helps your program specialist identify any challenges that you might be facing, and they'll be better able to provide you with resources that you need, or if you need any technical assistance, the more information that you provide. Again, these can be brief. You might want to include names of businesses and names of positions in that explanation field, just to give the number some context and then provide more detail in the Form B. So Form B, what we'll talk about next is the qualitative information. So this is where you tell the story about your projects. The data points are great in Form A, but they really don't tell your program specialist what is really going on. Here you can provide more information on different project milestones that aren't captured as indicators in Form A. It allows you to elaborate on any challenges that you're facing that you want your program specialist to be aware of. And it gives you some room to explain anything about your project that you didn't feel like was captured in the numbers that you entered in Form A. Again, the explanation field is brief, and Form B is where you can put those longer explanations. They can be as long as needed, but you want to remember that your program specialist must read through these during the review. So if you have some larger narrative or a newspaper article or anything that you want your program specialist to see, you can actually add these as attachments. So you'll want to kind of go through each column in Form B and add as much information as necessary, and tell the story about what's going on in your grant. When you work through Form B, you want to keep in mind that you want to provide information on things that happen during that reporting period. So this is different than what we tell you to do in Form A, which is you always enter cumulative information, whereas Form B, you can drill down to the specifics of what happened during that reporting period. So the form has multiple parts. Again, it helps your program specialist really get a sense of what's happening in your project and help you work out any challenges. The first part of the form is project information. here is where you'll just kind of describe your basic project information, like what your project is doing, the businesses created or expanded, and the geographic location. You'll complete this only in the first report, and then it will pre-populate in other reports that you submit. You only need to update if things change. So for example, if your project changed scope and isn't doing what it originally started doing in a previous report, you can update that in the PPR here. If things don't change, then it will just pre-populate through your entire project period. The rest of the form is kind of separated into 3 parts. A section where you can report on the accomplishments of your project and where you can report on the challenges. Again, this is really important, especially if you are having some challenges in your project, because your program specialist is here to help you. If you're reporting 0 on a lot of the actual to date indicators, your PPR won't be rejected for that as long as you're providing additional information. So for example, if your project is delayed in the first 6 months of reporting and you're not able to create any jobs and you have to enter 0 for a lot of the actual to date indicators, your report will be rejected if you don't explain why. But if you do explain why in Form A and Form B, then it just lets your program specialist know what's going on and they can assist you. The last section of Form B allows you to report any changes that happened. So if a planned service or a timeline is different than you originally proposed, this is when you can elaborate on this in that section. This may or may not apply to you. If your project hasn't changed, you can just write in the form that it does not apply to your project. The last form is Form E, and this collects financial data. This form does not replace the federal financial form, the SF-425 that you're required to submit. This just allows you to report on activities in your PPR. So it's separate from that form. You're required to submit the SF-425 separately. So here you're able to enter an activity, an estimated cost, and a total amount expended for the reporting period. So this is where you can report on any activity that you do, whether it's purchasing a building or providing a loan or buying a piece of equipment. Some project will have a lot of items here if your project is doing a lot, and some may not. It's kind of dependent on the nature of your project. So just report on what is relevant to you. And again, you can provide more information about what's going on with expenditures in Form B. So next, we will talk about some technical assistance that is available to you. So I do understand that that is a lot of information in one presentation, especially for newer folks on the line. So I hope that you continue to refer to this presentation as you complete your PPRs. And I'm sure that many of you have questions already from this presentation, or you may now that you're starting to collect data for the report due in April. So as you come up with questions, you'll want to stay in contact with your program specialist or the OCS registrar to assist you. Your program specialist provides some general grant assistance and guidance, and they are a great resource. They provide resources to help you and can help you make sense of any issues. Your program specialist is also a great person to reach out to when you're not really sure what to do. They can assist you or tell you the people that you need to contact. And the OCS registrar can help with more technical issues. So if you're having problems accessing OLDC, fixing any errors, or submitting the report, we can also help walk through the indicators with you and help you make sense of your PPR. We also have a lot of great resources available through October that we've created to really help with the PPR process. So like I said, today's webinar will be recorded and posted on the website for you to refer back to as much as possible. Today, we really focused on the PPR forms, what they are, what questions that you will be asked, and the meaning of the indicators. We have a webinar next week that's really going to be going over the resources that are already available to you for collecting the data for your PPR and going over a tool called the data collection tool that we've created that grantees can use to really help with the data collection process. We ask you to report on a lot of indicators, which can be a little bit daunting. So this tool really helps you organize your data and get to know what you're supposed to collect. So that presentation is going to be next Thursday, October 29th at 2 p.m. Eastern. You might have already registered for the webinar and that you should have that on your Outlook calendars. If not, we'll be sending a reminder following today's call for information on how you can register for that webinar. We also have a really exciting opportunity in October for PPR office hours. So these are going to be smaller sessions where grantees can come with specific questions related to the PPR, anything about the indicators, how to use OLDC, anything about data collection, and they'll be answered in a more informal format. So you can bring your really specific questions that are specific to your project or your indicator and can work with us to work through those data questions, anything about the PPR. So we have a kind of a list of what the PPR office hours when they'll be held. So you can sign up for these and join the small group sessions. If you have some more involved questions, you can also send us an email at the OCS registrar and we can provide some one-on-one assistance for you as well. So that's going to conclude today's call. I'm going to check if we have any questions. So we did get one question. I'll read it out loud. In order to make sure we're working with project partners and collect data correctly, when will these forms be available to us to see those metrics? So the forms are already available. If you have an OLDC login, you can actually go in and review the forms. We also have some sample forms available on the PPR information page of the CED website. So after today's call, when we send out some information about the recording, we can provide the links for where you can access those. And also, this is a great question about working with project partners. You want to let the businesses that you're working with know that this is the type of data that OCS is requiring you to collect and report on, and give them a heads up that you'll be requiring them to provide that data to you. So any other questions you can, again, submit through the Q&A function or ask us after the call at ocsregistrar@icf.com. I'll give folks a few more minutes to submit any questions. And also, if you had any issues with Teams Live, I know this is a new platform for everyone. Be sure to also send us an email at ocsregistrar@icf.com. We want to make sure that these sessions work well for everyone, are interactive. So send us your suggestions or anything after today's presentation as well. And if you had any sound quality issues, this will be recorded so you can review it afterwards. So I'm not seeing any more questions. Again, bring any specific questions to PPR office hours. We'll be sending out reminders about how to register for next week's webinar and PPR office hours throughout October. So with no other questions, we can end a couple minutes early, give you a few minutes of your day back. Again, thanks for joining us. Join next week's presentation as well.